Yo, what's up? This is Disco Bay, formerly.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.
Hey, good afternoon. It's the 26th of April, and we've had some pretty interesting developments in the world. Most notably, 200,000 deaths, something like that, globally.
In cases, not deaths.
Or cases,
right?
that's right. No, 2 million, over 2 million cases?
Was it 200,000 deaths? Is it really
I think
that?
it's 200,000 deaths, like globally.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right.
It's getting there. I saw this chart last night that was representing case and fatalities from beginning of the outbreak, and they was comparing it against every other plague that humanity's had to face, and it's incredible how fast this thing is spread and how quickly it reached like the cholera death rate. Like it's moving much faster, but it's also kind of a testament to our technology that we've been able to get through this as much of it as we have and be aware of these numbers, and that there is progress. There's a lot of progress being made. It just doesn't seem like it because the United States is testing at far greater numbers than other places, and so we have higher numbers, and so it makes it appear that it's much worse when the reality is it's that way everywhere.
Right.
So
Yeah, and that, I think that gap in testing is one of the biggest issues about actually figuring out where the situation is, because, you have governments talking about trying to reopen, but because the testing is inadequate, it's really impossible to know if we're at the first peak, the second peak, or, if this is where, like, I don't think any projection has us in the segment where we're actually tapering off, but it's just hard to know if it's the first peak or the second wave.
yeah,
And that's where, the second wave in many projections is going to be worse, especially if the lockdowns and quarantines are lifted. So that's where it's just, we're at a weird place because as you're saying, we're aware of numbers to a certain scale, but then we're not really aware of what's happening on the ground in a lot of places.
yeah.
Even within America, it's hard to get a sense of, New York versus Indiana versus California versus Oregon, and the differences. There's a huge difference between what's happening in Iowa versus what's happening in Indiana, but for different reasons.
Oh yeah, population density, geography, the kind of traffic that goes through a state. These are all
their exports, the industry that's local, and this is where you have meat plants shutting down, and a lot of farm operations not able to keep going. This is happening in Europe as well. So this is the issue with famine. The potential for famine is definitely there, but it's not because of coronavirus. It's because we haven't adequately automated where we can. So then, because there's a need for manual labor that's not automated, that is what's actually going to be the reason for potential famine, and not because we weren't capable of producing agricultural output during this time. It's just
Yeah.
we've been
They've been destroying food. They've been
Yeah.
destroying food and milk and eggs. And I was reading about a bunch of chickens that are just going to be destroyed because they're not going to be able to be processed or something like that. Maybe
Yep, they're
maybe they've already been
destroying-
partially processed, but there's nowhere to send them, so they got to destroy them.
Yeah, they have to destroy like potatoes, just all kinds of stuff that. And when we're talking about chickens being quote unquote destroyed, there's an element of imperialism that allows us to look at animals in such a way that
We can just destroy them.
yeah, we can just destroy them as if their lives are completely meaningless except for being relevant to the food chain
Yeah.
and the supply chain. And that's kind of where there's a whole lot of problems with the colonialist view. It's been destroying the planet in the first place, but now we have capitalist colonialism literally destroying food in the middle of a pandemic and setting up the potential for a famine because of the rules and not because there's any actual rhyme or reason to destroying the food right now.
Yeah, it's one of those things that doesn't make sense. We live in the most sophisticated country. Well, one of the most sophisticated countries. We have one of the most well-defined and developed infrastructures that exist. And yet we can't get the food to places because, well, they can't process it. Tyson shut down a meatpacking facility in where is it, Virginia, Georgia? There have been a bunch of meatpacking facilities that have all closed recently.
Yeah.
One in Indiana, there was an outbreak of coronavirus, so they shut it down too. Everyone expects bacon prices to go up. Seriously, it's not an if, it's a how soon is it going to happen?
Yeah.
And this is really, this isn't like a sky is falling thing or a go out and buy a deep freeze and start stocking it up with meat. It's that our infrastructure just took a big hit, and people need to be aware that this is going to impact everything for a short period of time until they recover. And this is a process. This is an ongoing process. And I think it's important that we remember that, because, this isn't the first plague that humanity has dealt with. And we have more sophisticated communication tools and more sophisticated, basically magic science in terms of healthcare. We just have to figure out how this thing is actually killing us and the best way to treat it, because our healthcare system can't really even seem to figure out the best way to treat this thing.
Right.
I mean, practically everyone in New York that went on a ventilator died. And so it's clearly there's something that's going on there that's not right. Now they're finding, because of the inflammation, the cytokine storm, they're finding that there's neurological trauma happening because blood vessels are being constricted. Young people that are suffering strokes, like people in our age range that aren't supposed to be that we have an exceptionally low incidence of stroke are dying from strokes. And then other doctors are reporting blood clots, all sorts of clotting that shouldn't happen. This is a really, I hate to get all doom and gloom about it, but this is a really serious thing. It fucks with our blood. It fucks with our airways. It suffocates people by inhibiting.
And part of it is they don't understand who it does it to, because then there can't be, there's so many different effects that there has to be a reason people are getting different effects, whether it's blood type, whether it's diet. There's something to it, but there's not enough. We're all in a reactive scientific phase, and there hasn't been enough proactive time to evaluate why there's difference in the same way where it's everybody doesn't have the same symptoms. So why does not everybody not have the same symptoms, but they can't fucking answer that question? That's a simple question relatively, but it's actually a very complex question, because the science that would go into answering it, they don't have time to do it because they're still just trying to keep people from dying. So there's not really a chance to go in and look at all the different effects and all the different demographics to say, oh, if you're a white male with the blood type B negative, you might see these symptoms. But if you're a woman who's a person of color with the O type blood type O positive, you might see these symptoms, which are going to be completely different than the man who's type B negative, who's white. And there's just not enough good science that is that has time to get the enough demographic samples, as well as to get the duration of potential effects, because now they're saying people who've been infected may not have the proper antibodies to fight against it. So that implies one of two or a couple of things. There might be mutations happening so fast that by the time someone recovers from having it, they may be able to be infected by another variation. And then if the variations are already based on blood type in the first place, somebody, if it's because you're Rh positive or Rh negative, and then you have the ABO blood type, there may be two different variations that are going on different attachments to the blood. So one may be because of your AB or O, and then one may be because you're Rh positive or negative. And that's like, we don't know. Those things aren't even necessarily being discussed. They may be researching it, but they haven't had enough time to determine if that's even a thing. And again, there's so many things happening with the symptoms, with the asymptomatic people who are carriers, and then on top of that, all of the different symptoms that are showing that there's got to be common denominators somewhere, but we don't know what they are yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so scary in many ways.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, it was actually like a month ago, I read there were at the time, there were 5 identified mutations. And then a week or so later, it had jumped up to 9. And just last week, I read there are like 30 identified variations of this thing floating around. So clearly this thing's mutating much quicker than previously believed. There's definitely something happening that's not... We're not using our technology to track this as quickly or as effectively as we probably could be.
I mean, and part of the problem is the coronavirus generally is the type of strain that would be associated with the common cold. And we already knew that there were at least 1,000 different variations on that in the first place. So we're talking about something that is effectively a super cold that we can't fight off because we've been unable to fight it off in its less fatal forms. This iteration is obviously more than one iteration, but then you have people who wanted to label 1,000 different coronaviruses with one common cold in the first place. So there's this disconnect between how science actually approaches these things within what the layperson's interpretation is. It's like all coronaviruses were just lumped into one layperson terminology before. Now this is why people are laughing at the notion of Corona 1 through 18, when really there's over 1,000 versions of Corona. And that's kind of like, it's hard to discuss that with people who don't believe in evolution in the first place.
There's this kind of absurdity to it where everyone's aware that there's swine flu and avian flu and, all the various H whatever, N whatever. There are so many versions of influenza, and we've got to develop new vaccines every year for that. Why would this be any different? Especially now that they know that it's mutating as quickly as it is. That's the thing that's the part that's really kind of scary, is that it's doing things faster than our science is able to keep up with. Or maybe they can keep up with, they're just not looking in the right places yet. Or they don't have time because they're overwhelmed. There's so many reasons that something could go unnoticed during a crisis. Especially when everyone's running around, they don't have enough protective equipment. So they're going to be doing things a little bit more, hopefully they're doing things a little bit more carefully so that they don't risk any more than they have to. But that also means that there's not as much time for other things. When I watch videos of people on the frontline healthcare facilities talking about the way they have to put the gear on, and then how it's pretty much like you don't get to eat, you don't get to drink anything, you don't get to go to the bathroom for pretty much the entire shift. That's insane. They can't take that stuff off.
It can't be healthy.
No.
I mean, that there has to be some sort of negative side effect that they're suffering health-wise, trying to prevent uh, contracting coronavirus. And I think, this is where American culture is really bad about finding middle ground. It's very reactive and polar in that, the reaction to coronavirus is lockdown, quarantine, because we don't know any middle ground. There's just no culture that is moderate here. It's like moderation always seems to be what scientists tell people to do in any realm, whether it's diet, whether it's working out, health precautions. Anytime you overdo something, there's the potential negative downturn. And that seems to be one of the biggest problems we have here.
Thousands of years ago, there was this dude in India who spoke about the benefits of moderation. And then, this other dude that everyone seems to think is the man went and hung out with those guys and brought back that knowledge of moderation. And then even today, we fetishize Buddhism, but nobody really seems to be aware of the concept of the middle path. Or at least it gets paid lip service, but it's, I have a hard time believing that insert Hollywood actor who's like, oh, I'm all Buddhist, is living the middle path.
I mean, even monks aren't living the middle path.
Yeah.
That's an extreme that,
Like a monk in America, that's not the middle path, is it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if being a monk anywhere is a middle path. If you become a monk is an extreme path.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And this is one of the things that you learn when you're looking at philosophy is that even in religious teachings, they'll say, if you spend all of your time enveloped in religious teaching and learning, then you don't actually have any time to apply that into living. So a person who spends their entire life studying religious texts and trying to practice religion is not actually living life. So that is not a middle path.
Yeah.
So a monk, a hermit, someone who has devoted their entire life to religion is not the middle path by definition.
That's actually a good point. That's an extremist.
Yeah, and this is one of the, when you actually learn the teachings and you try to figure out what they're trying to express, this is where you see a monk must go into the real world and apply those teachings in order to actually attain the middle path. Otherwise, they are an extremist.
Yeah. That's a really good perspective on it, actually.
I think this is why that Kung Fu series was so attractive as a middle ground of East meets West in that...
classic David Carradine?
Yeah, because then you have Grasshopper going out and into the real world and trying to stay morally uncorrupted while being in a corrupted world, and this is the only way to actually walk the middle path. You can't walk a middle path if you are only in an uncorruptible environment.
Yeah. Speaking of Kung Fu, and its ties to Bruce Lee, I watched the Green Hornet movie is on Netflix right now, and I watched that years ago with a friend of mine, and it was fun then. It's a terrible movie, but there was this one moment where you realize how much of that movie is like homage to Bruce Lee. Like the fight choreography it's just fantastic. And of course, they muddle it up with all this weird CGI stuff to make it look more interesting than because they think it needs to be more interesting looking, I guess. But it has actually some really clever. It's almost like a hybrid of like Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan style choreography.
Yeah, and I thought
really
they actually
impressive.
did a really good job casting Seth Rogen as the Green Hornet and mocking that um, sidekick compartmentalization of Bruce Lee
Yeah.
and saying like, yeah, we get what they did and we're gonna mock it
Well,
in an intelligent way.
in a lot of ways, they're also giving the nod to the I think it was a '90s movie or '80s movie called Dragon, the Bruce Lee story with Jason Scott Lee, I believe. And I think during the portion of that story where they're going over the Green Hornet, he doesn't follow any of his lines. The Hornet's just sitting there tied up in a chair like, good job, Kato. Now set me free. And he keeps saying like, good job, Kato. Good job, Kato. And Kato's just walking around kicking everyone's asses.
Yeah.
I think that's what this movie is.
I mean, but that's how the real show was.
That's true.
And I think that's like, it's definitely both. But the issue
that was
with the original show was that Bruce Lee was the action star, and then the show was named Green Hornet, even though Kato was the one that knew all the martial arts.
Well, what gets even more interesting about this, so I went and dug up some old time radio Green Hornet stories, and they're barely listenable. They've got so much noise, and they're just it's just hard to listen to. But these are just good old fashioned detective stories. They've got a crime. They've got some clues. They got to talk to some people. They go confront some suspects, and there might be some action. And that was actually really interesting. And so then, of course, I'm like, well, I got to see how this translates once they actually inject Bruce Lee into Green Hornet, and they're completely different shows. Like it's Green Hornet with Kato with Bruce Lee is Green Hornet in name only.
Exactly. And I think, that's why when you look at the comic books and what they did with the characters, there's iterations of the Green Hornet where Green Hornet is actually important, but Kato is carrying it when Bruce Lee is in the series, and then as you're saying, when they allude to it, Kato still carries the series, and that's kind of where it's definitely a post Bruce Lee Green Hornet that is being referenced in the Dragon and in the new film.
Yeah. The best part about the new film was, this is kind of funny. The best part for me was all of the weird equipment, like the coffee maker, or it wasn't that there was a underground garage or a garage full of fancy cars. It was that there were all these extra tools in it that were like, almost like a, let's see, we think of like basement scientist or like a scientist who works in a basement laboratory type situation. This is like a basement laboratory version of Tony Stark in a lot of ways. Kato is. Well, it's really cool.
Because even in the original series, they would have that scene where the Black Beauty would drive in the garage and it would flip over, which they called back to. So there was always this element of the Green Hornet is kind of like not necessarily a low-grade Tony Stark, but
he's got aspects of Batman or of Bruce Wayne, and Kato's got at this point, Kato is the Tony Stark brain. But he needs Britt's money. He needs those resources. It's interesting. The story, it relies on a super intelligent, kung fu intelligent Chinese guy to save the day.
Right.
That's fairly uncommon, and it's a mainstream American movie. It's not like a imported from Hong Kong. Let's dub over everyone except for Jackie Chan's English. Jackie Chan speaks like 7 languages or something dumb. but English is the one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but nobody but white men were allowed to be the action star for a long time. Yeah. Which, this is where now we're seeing movies or TV shows that make women the protagonist or the action hero, and then you get those people who don't like it. A lot of the hate towards Star Trek Picard there's no legitimate hate. There's no reason to legitimately hate that show unless you hate women. That's the only reason you can hate Picard. There's some, it's not the next generation. The style is completely different, but the next generation doesn't. That style doesn't work now. Like we're not in the 90s. We're not in a time where we're completely ignorant of the realities of the world, and that's what the next generation was.
Yeah.
Next generation can only exist when you don't know what's happening on the other side of the planet. Whereas now, when you look at Discovery and Picard, they're much more. We'll call them intergalactic narratives in terms of a more globalized world. That when we're talking about conflicts in the past series, they're always very distant, and
it never comes back to Earth.
Exactly. You never really see how the conflicts in the Beta Quadrant or the Gamma Quadrant affect Earth, whereas now a conflict somewhere affects people everywhere or entities everywhere, and that's kind of the connected universe that we're seeing. That
the thing that gets me about like if I don't know what the complaints are about Picard, really. Like I read a bunch of stuff of comments in long drawn out threads where people just bicker at each other, and there's no point being made.
There's no legitimate complaints. There are none.
Like, I can't understand how anyone would have a problem with a cyborg being built to look female or male. Cyborgs don't have gender.
But they don't understand that principle. I mean, this is what it draws back to.
Do we think of our like power tools like that? I mean, this is DeWalt. He's a mighty drill.
When's the last time you watched Lost in Space?
The new one?
The old one.
Oh, the old one? Man, that shit is so terrible.
The whole reason I'm asking, the first thing that the humans do when they encounter Robbie the robot is ask his gender.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they do.
Oh,
Very first thing. They're trying to... It's a robot. It has no fucking genitals. What gender are you? We're going to call you Robbie.
The Futurama makes fun of that kind of voice level trope. Like, oh, it must be male because it has a deep voice. And at one point, Bender is arguing with the Planet Express ship over the radio station because its voice is tuned to a low pitch, so it's like a dude and they're arguing. But as soon as Leela turns the pitch up, all of a sudden it's this chick, and now they're flirting.
Yep. Well, that's just like they did a episode of the show called Tacoma FD where it's a show about firefighters, and they have this single voice where the firefighters call in and nobody can tell what gender the voice is. So one person will be like, oh, it's a man. And the other person will be like, oh, it's a woman. And some people are flirting with it. Some people are like looking at it as a wise entity because they think it's a man. And then you realize at the end of the show that it's a voice that's supposed to degender the call, and everybody's filtered through this voice. So whatever you hear is what you impose on it, and it's actually a Rorschach test for what you want to hear in the voice. And
that's fantastic.
There's this element of this is, I think, why when people see a transgender person and they don't know it's transgender, then they get offended if they feel attracted to that person, in the sense of when you don't have clear signals of what something is and you impose your own idea onto it, then you take yourself on a journey, and that thing is almost irrelevant in what you are thinking about. And that's kind of like that's what was the genius in that episode, is they showed all the different people took this single voice in all these different directions because they had their own ideas.
That's actually really clever. I think that it's got to, I don't know. There's got to be some aspect of when someone who's cisgendered is attracted to what they believe to be like a woman, and then they find out that it's a transgendered person. I mean, that's like an expression of their own fears,
right?
And they're projecting anything that they should be reflecting upon they're projecting that onto the person that they were mistaken about, still attracted to. They can't confront the attraction.
And I think part of it is the people in that situation have been conditioned to look for certain signals that are saying, oh, this is a man, this is a woman. And then whether it's like hair length, hip to shoulder width ratio, or whatever it is, then if those people see it on a transgender person and it triggers them, then they feel ashamed because they got tricked by society's standards of what they're told determine a sex, and then they a lot of times externalize it towards the person instead of internalizing as their own uh, poor judgment about what makes a person or what defines a gender.
Well, that's just sad.
I mean, but this is why the person asked Robbie the robot what his gender is or its gender. It's like people need to have clear signals so they don't let themselves go on a mental journey like, oh, Robbie the robot's kind of sexy, and then you find out, oh, it's a man. Does that make me gay? And then I'm supposed to hate gay people, but I was attracted to Robbie the robot. And there's all these things about genderizing things that then lead down this path of making something the other, or this is a lot of xenophobic ideas come from what defines gender. Even down to when you have people who are cross-dress. I mean, they still do cross-dress, but when somebody cross-dresses, the only reason it's called cross-dressing is because we have this idea of what we all believe women should wear clothes-wise. It's like skirts, dresses, blouses, bras. There's all these things that we've decided, oh, women should be wearing these things because that's a feminine set of clothing. But then if a man wears it, he's cross-dressing, even though technically he's just dressing.
I'm pretty sure that in most of Asia, men and women, at least until Europeans appeared, just wore whatever they had, and they dressed very similarly. And I don't think I'm pretty sure that I don't know how to describe it. I think there have always been like a third gender. You know, the person that crosses those, or that bridges the two. And then it's with the West that we find concepts like shame and what's another way? Guilt, perversion. I think those are things those are concepts within Western culture that are used as tools to limit growth.
Yes, most definitely.
And I'm not trying to advocate that everyone go out and watch some fucking tentacle hentai or anything like that. That's a completely different level of exploring. I'm not sure what to call it, what they're exploring. But that's the thing, is that there's this whole spectrum of sexuality that gets put on a shelf behind in a closet almost, because our society doesn't want to talk about it.
For the record, I'm not quite positive, but wasn't tentacle hentai like a way to get around censorship rules?
Yeah.
Because like Japan had crazy porn censorship laws.
Yeah, for the longest time, I think it's been something like you can't have pubic hair, but they can show genitalia, but then they can't be using it. No one can be touching it.
Mm-hmm.
And so
yeah, they have some crazy random censorship. Or I think they're gone now.
Yeah.
But they had some crazy.
I think they were based around like pubic hair, but it also meant that there couldn't be any like visible armpit hair.
Mm.
It was like bodily hair was unacceptable for some period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's It's not like Canada, I guess, where that you can find naked people on public television, apparently. But
No, well,
it's a different culture.
and then this gets back to there's been a lot of study on post World War II influence on sexuality in Japan and Germany, and it seems as if there has been a lot of what's the word people's sexuality was greatly influenced by the perception of whether they won or lost a war, so much so that there's generational studies on why large segments of the population are asexual in both Japan and Germany. Because then it's like similar thing happened in Germany, and that's why the responses were so dramatically different. Where you have state-sponsored pornography in Germany, and then heavy censorship in Japan. Because in Germany they're trying to promote more sexuality by pushing pornography, and then they're trying to repress in the other segment, but a lot of it is still seemingly in response to the perception of having lost a war, or at least that's how it's framed. So I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but this is something that's actually been studied over decades to see.
And how much of that is the observer effect?
Right.
Yeah.
Which, again, that's why I'm framing it. I don't know. I'm not saying those things are directly related, but there has been a study, if there is a correlation, and it's not, they didn't find nothing. It'd be different if they searched for something and found nothing, but they didn't find nothing. And that's where it doesn't mean that those two things are necessarily related, but that means there's a relationship.
I wonder what kind of like economic impact that has, like generational economic impact. If there's a generation of people who, through, I'm not even sure how to compartmentalize that, because, America is always, go Team America, chip in your $1.05, and we'll save the world from itself or something like that, right? But America's not even the world police anymore. They kind of gave up that role. Germany was the world police for a while, but I don't know. It's crazy. I was reading about how like oil markets all tanked recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it costs them money to produce the oil. Like, it went down into the negative for a while for a lot of them. I think I can't remember the name of it. There's like one big oil futures market that was stable, Brent or something like that. Anyways, it just blows my mind that leading up to all this, OPEC and Saudi Arabia and Russia were all just like fuck you, oh yeah, fuck you, oh yeah, fuck you, nah, fuck you, the whole time. I'm sorry about that, Ozzy, man. I kind of lifted your bit, but it was happening, and they couldn't agree on oil prices. They couldn't agree on production levels. They couldn't agree on anything. And then, lo and behold, no one needs any gas anymore. And who's the loser in this one? Because it's not any of those three. It's fucking America. And on top of that, because all these fields have ceased pumping because it's too expensive to pump, they're all leaking methane. So there are pictures from space that show, the rest of the world is experiencing this really interesting calming effect where pollution is lifting. And it happened in America, in the cities. But now there's pollution in our oil fields, in our natural gas fields. And it's in places where we normally register like zero chlorofluorocarbon output. And now it's like lighting up. Everyone else is fine because they've been maintaining their equipment, and it's not like decades old infrastructure. It's incredible. But that's what we get for having a well-developed infrastructure.
I mean, that's also what we get for having 70-something-year-old people still in charge.
Yeah, that too.
I'm looking at, what was it, the average age of Congress, something like 58, something stupid. And then, I mean, whether you're talking about Congress or the Senate, it's too high. There's no way that somebody who's over the age of 60 understands the complexities of the world right now in a way that realistically enables them to make decisions about the future. Yet, we're at a spot where all of the people in power are effectively over 60 and none of them want to cede power. Also, because the people who are our age have been put in a spot where we've been infantilized by an economy to make it look like we don't know economics when really there's no nobody could have avoided the disaster that came to America in any spot. If you were in the economy, you're going to get hit. And unless you're in the 1%,
So
even they got hit.
48 senators are over the age of 65. 147 representatives are over the age of 65. 15
Jesus
governors are
Christ.
over the age of 65.
Oh my God.
The average age of Democratic House leadership is 72 years old.
Oof.
The average age of Republican House leadership is 48.
What?
Yeah.
Wow, that's surprising, honestly. Of all.
Wait. So House committee leadership with Republican chairman averaging 59 years old and ranking Democrats
Okay.
averaging 68 years old. So
What?
yeah, this is so messed up. Like 1/3 of the representatives are over 60 represent districts with a median age of 35 or less.
Wow.
More than half of senators who are up for re-election are over the age of 65. It looks like, or no, that was in 2018. 2020, 12 senators are under 65 who are up for re-election, and there are 21 senators over 65 who are up for re-election in 2020. Like,
That shouldn't even be possible. Like,
Yeah.
If we have a lower age limit, we need to have an upper age limit. That's just the way it should be. I don't care if anybody doesn't like that idea. You can't have a lower age limit without having an upper age limit. It doesn't make any sense. In terms of having people, if the idea is that the person who is not old enough, does not have enough life experience or education, then there is a point in which somebody becomes too disconnected from modernity and too disconnected from understanding what's happening in the world to actually be making decisions either.
I think it's less that than they're too invested. They've been in it for so long that there's no way that they couldn't be invested in whatever it is they're doing.
I mean, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Because they're invested, that means they don't understand what it's like to not be invested. It's the same thing. Like if I'm somebody who's got a 401k and my 401k is all in pharmaceuticals, I'm not going to want to change the pharmaceutical industrial complex.
That's true.
And it doesn't matter if diabetics have to pay $300 for their insulin because I'm at a spot where I get money off of it. So I don't care about that anymore. It doesn't affect me. So once people get so disconnected from the situation of a 40-year-old, somebody who's 60 does not know what it's like to be 40 in today's economy. That renders them incapable of understanding. Not to say that they can't empathize, but that they literally can't understand. In the same way I can't understand what it's like to be 60. In the same way I can't understand what it's like to be 20. So that's a larger argument for having representation across age demographics rather than saying one representative for all age demographics, because there's different interests.
It looks like we've got a special guest. I'd like to introduce Snark the Goblin.
Good day, sir. I think we're having some audio issues.
Snark, is everything okay?
Oh,
Nope.
Lost him.
We lost him. He'll be back. No, that's a really good point though. Like, when I was younger, I always joked about vice funds, like kind of how during times of panic, the things that people always want are cigarettes, alcohol, guns,
Right.
You know, the foundation level vices. And you know, at the time, I thought, you know, that makes a lot of sense. This is good for me, right? But really, it's those industries don't need money like that.
Right.
They don't need any help from anyone. They've got plenty of attention and money and resources from, you know, NRA, all of the tobacco, all of big tobacco. You know, it's funny.
Well,
The booze industry, I'm pretty sure, is supported by like a very small portion of the population.
well, one of the big issues though is the bars are closed.
That too.
While the booze industry, they have liquor stores open, the bars are getting hit because they're social congregation places and they're not able to be open right now. So, on the one hand, yeah, there are spikes in liquor sales at liquor stores, but where, you know, we have bars closing down. Um, and then I wonder what's going to happen if a lot of bars close down and then they don't open back up, if that's going to change the drinking culture where I always thought it was kind of dumb that bars charge so much where, you know, basically you're paying extra for beer so you can hang out with people around other people.
I thought the point was so that you could have access to a larger liquor cabinet than you would normally be able to maintain on your own.
I mean, kind of, but then that's where, because you're paying extra for drinks, then you could just pitch in with people at home. Like the way that they present it, it's like if everybody pitched in and did these social events at their friends' houses on the weekend, then that wouldn't apply in the same way.
Yeah.
Usually, you know, people just go in on keggers because they're fucking lazy. If you really wanted to have a good party, you know, one of the things that we would do when I was in college was we would have a fucking bartender come to our party.
Yeah.
And that's like, then they sell the drinks there and non-jacked up prices. You're not getting overcharged and you get the same environment and the liquor cabinet. It's not that actually difficult to find somebody who has a mobile liquor cabinet to come bartend at a party. You just have to be thinking that way instead of being like, oh, I'm going to go out to the bars because they have more alcohol. Like, no, fucking throw a party and bring a bartender because then their tips are going to be fat and they have all the liquor.
Yeah.
This is the proper way forward right there. That is a solid idea.
And again, it's just people weren't thinking that way. That's why our parties were the best, because we would have bartenders.
Yeah, never underestimate the power of somebody who knows how to mix a drink and isn't getting drunk the whole night so they can continue making drinks that are good and don't start tasting like fuel. That always made me mad when I'd get a drink that tasted like gasoline. It's like, what the fuck? How'd you do that?
Well, because then you get better at partying. It's like, you know, when we first started partying, it would be Coors Light kegs and Natural Light kegs. And then you're like, okay, you can get Honey Brown kegs. You can get kegs of better alcohol. And then you realize, like, get both.
And then it's like, wait a second, guys.
Both and a bartender.
There are microbrews all over the place. We can get kegs from them. Holy crap. Yeah.
Yep.
Does this Miller Lite actually count as real beer then?
Miller Lite is the stuff that they collect after they spray down the beer making machine.
It's clear. It's not.
That's what I mean. They take a hose and they turn it on and they clean out all of the machine that they use to make beer, real beer, and they collect that, and that's Miller Lite. It's the same. It's like Duff beer, you know, Duff Light and Duff Dry. They all came out of one tube. Well, that drain feeds into Miller Lite and Coors Light and Bud Light. They're That's the only way I can rationalize it.
Well, rational and cheap beer in the same sentence. I just don't know about humans.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in China, the labels on the beer have a varying alcohol range. So in the north, I remember seeing from 2 to greater than 2, but less than 4% alcohol. But the further inland or further into central eastern seaboard of China, it became more like greater than 1, less than 3.
Oh wow.
But then by the time we got down into southern China, into Guangzhou, the beer was back up to normal, like American standards, so like 3 to 5%. And you could find like fancy beer that had, all the alcohol in it you wanted, but for the most part, it was the stuff that we saw was this Chinese state beer. It was like beer of China, alcohol range, and it was cheaper than water. It was, and when you're in a place where the water out of the tap is not safe to drink, beer that's cheaper than water is pretty damn good. You have to drink the whole thing the whole time to catch a buzz.
Cheaper to produce than filtering water.
Yep.
The ancient practice of watering down wine is to get around filtering water. It's a very old practice. It's just you choose a different nomenclature for your alcohol.
Yeah, I mean,
being the goblin that I am, I took notes of your earlier discussion. You were speaking about crops being destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Well, I thought about that from a very goblin socialist point of view, which it's completely baffling. But putting my brains to it, it's in a very twisted, cynical way, they're creating a greater demand when this is over by destroying crops.
That's exactly what they're doing. And
they'll hopefully, in their minds, reap the benefit. Well, if I don't have several kilotons of potatoes, they're going to be more expensive when this all theoretically.
Yeah, but they've also lost a season of.
Goes back to normal. I don't know if nothing is ever normal.
Yeah, they're going to lose a season of growing, and of course, all the people that would have been employed within that framework aren't getting paid for that job. I'm sure there's some kind of insurance policy that allows them to do where this is preferable than trying to find distribution to like local food banks.
There is. But the problem becomes if everybody has to hit their insurance at the same time, then insurance companies go under.
So it's our healthcare. That's like just like our healthcare system.
It's very possible if all of the farmers file their their claims at once, then the insurance company might say we can't pay it and just go under. That's a very strong possibility. The issue is then all the executives in those insurance companies that have been getting their $1 billion for the last 10, 20 years aren't going to give back that money that they've been pocketing to save the insurance payments.
Of course not.
And this is why.
Why would they do that? They have no interest in that.
Well, I think what you're sadly seeing is the veneer of the American system. Everybody's saying, oh, it's caused these things. I would argue from an outside point of view, watching humans for thousands of years, these have been here, and it's your problems that the veneer has been ripped away, and you're seeing them clearly. Some of people have never felt, what's the phrase I'm looking for? They're falsely equating it with oppression. Oh, you've had to stay in for 2 weeks to flatten the curve for the greater good. And they're screaming like it's Anne Frank's or Rosa Parks. It's like, it's insanity.
What's interesting is... over the last several years, I've seen this reoccurring meme that shows some fantasy cabin in the mountains or on a lake, or it's a beachfront bungalow, and they're like, could you stay here for a month with no internet for $1 million? And everyone's like, ooh, sign me up. But what this has shown me is that the vast majority of people would not be able to accomplish this. Even when presented, you're in your home, you have all this stuff that you've been, hopefully, we've got hobbies, we've got books, we've got the fucking internet. If you can't find some entertainment on the internet.
Apparently they lack imagination and self-control.
Yeah, well, if somebody can't get by for a month in their house with the internet, how the fuck are they going to get through a month in a cabin in remote isolation without the internet? There will be no walls left to climb up. There will be no skin left to crawl out of. I mean, that's... God, I never thought the internet would provide us this kind of objective lesson in just I'm not
Well,
even
when
sure.
you see like the sort of collective culture of a people being displayed under states of stress, I'm reminded of when the double disaster of the tidal waves in turn caused the meltdown in Fukushima in Japan. And it was truly horrible, absolutely terrible. For the most part, I did not see or nor hear riots, looting, and it's not a good or a bad difference. It's just a difference of culture that they were like, oh, the greater good, we should stay in, we should not. And it's watching Americans, like Chris was saying earlier, that the two sort of like completely isolate and don't speak to anybody versus, oh, we've got to sacrifice our elderly for the economy. It's like, what is this madness? It's like there's put your brains together, find a way to flatten the curve first, take care of each other, and then the money hopefully will be secondary. But what I'm seeing is the money is the primary, and people are not even secondary, they're tertiary. Very sad state.
Well, but then you see in Japan, they were very quick to start issuing payments to people. So then when your government is supporting you and sending you money, you don't have to worry about going back to work because you're not going to have your home taken away because you can't pay rent, and you can pay your bills and you can go buy food. So all of the things that we're seeing in Japan, our government should have obviously done, but then we don't get told what they're doing there. So then it's like, oh, I still haven't received a fucking $1,200 payment. And my car insurance sent me $50 before our government was able to pay us with the money they're saying we need to survive. My fucking car insurance company sent me money before our government was able to send it out. It's because we have fucking old people handling our shit. And again, I'm not trying to sound ageist, but there's no other way to say it. There's no other way to say it.
It seems like there comes a point where your age becomes a detriment among humanity. Step aside. Let the younger.
I thought it was funny when they decided, like, well, maybe we can use systems like PayPal or what's the other, Venmo or some shit.
Yeah, they're talking about Cash App and Venmo.
Yeah.
That shit would have been way quicker, apparently.
I know.
We're watching the collective flailing of arms and like, oh, we did not see this coming. Not the people themselves saying this, but the top tiers of the government and His Madness King Orange.
Actually, there are videos of George W. Bush going on about how it's important that we develop a national plan and coordinate with the nations of the world so that we can be prepared for something just like this. And it was right after SARS, and then it was during swine flu. Obama was like, hey, this is why we've got this program in place, and this is how we're going to bolster it and improve our side of the equation, and we're going to work with our partners around the world to make sure that we're prepared for this eventuality. And then 2017, you guys are fired, and here we are.
The theory amongst us goblins about His Madness King Orange, when he gets his advisors in and they go over everything, and they tell him, oh, you should pursue this course of action, whatever this course of action, in response to. Not only does he not take that response, he'll be like, well, what's the exact opposite I could do to do the most damage? That's what we see. It's like he does the exact thing that would magnify the problem.
Well, yeah. The big question on the internet that I see in every thread about any of this stuff is, well, how do you know that?
How many humans after this do you think will actually discover the written word? They'll read books. Hopefully that will be somewhat of a positive out of this.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know if that's the people who we would hope read books are now the same ones who were talking about 5G is transmitting the coronavirus. It's like they doubled down on their stupidity even more.
And it's frightening because these are the same tinfoil hat humans that were growing on about adrenochrome and the Pizzagate and the satanic cult pedophilia ring in Washington, D.C. And it's like there's a real madman in the White House, a real and present threat, and you choose to chase after these strange theories. I just don't
Or
understand.
the people who are talking about Bill Gates, being somebody who's trying to spread the virus and kill people. Bill Gates has done more altruistic work than anybody on the face of the fucking planet. Maybe it was because of Melinda, I don't know. But the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has done more for the face of this planet than anybody else. Yeah. So when we're talking about Bill Gates, anybody who's saying he's trying to kill people needs to shut the entire fuck up unless you're about to go put $1 billion into saving people, because that dude's done way more than that already.
That's the
way more than that.
His foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has basically provided all of the brute force behind the discovery of successful treatments for malaria. Like,
that's actually impressive. Yeah.
Like he's concerned about this stuff and he's mobilized. I still see, these fringe posts about Event 201, and it's very clear that the people that are creating this literature have not actually read the white paper. They didn't watch the actual video footage from the conference. They're unaware that there was a pandemic simulation that ran and had members from every country involved, and they all took notes. And
well, invariably, and this goes back to something that you will be familiar with on Twitter, the whole Karen thing. The connection between these sorts of folks, these false equivalences that they have, and they all seem to be intertwined. It's like you find out like, oh, you're this, but you're also this, this, and this. And it's like, how do you extricate all of these horrible ideas of, like, the woman who tried to say that Karen is the equivalent of a centuries-old racial slur born out of slavery. It's how do you get that information from them? Because apparently that cognitive process to distinguish these things from one another.
Magical thinking?
That is quite magical thinking.
I mean, I can't. Shark jumping? Tiger jumping? Tigers are in vogue right now, right? People like tigers. So that's some tiger raising shit right there.
Well, and people don't even understand when they're being mocked either, because they're so deep in their like trope that, like, these comedians, like, there's a guy on Twitter that goes, his name is Brent Terhune, and he's very much a satire, but people think he's real because the people that do come out thinking like this are so outrageously over the top.
Yeah. What can you do, though?
I mean, everybody's opinion is not valuable. Yeah. And that's kind of where, like, we need to reframe whose opinions are valuable. Just because everybody has a right to talk doesn't mean we have to all listen to what they have to say, and we need to start muting people more. I think that's the big issue, is everybody has the power to mute. You don't have to listen to shit. I have his Madness King Orange muted and blocked. So, and anytime that word comes up on my Twitter feed, it fucking blanks it out. I don't want to hear about that shit. I don't want to hear about that dude.
Yeah.
My psyche is 1,000 times better because that word is taken out of anything that comes up. Anytime somebody posts about that dude, I don't see it. And it doesn't mean I can't understand what's happening. That means I don't get needlessly bombarded by some shit that's going to poison my mind. And that's kind of where I've curated my mental zone so that anytime I want to find out about what this dude's doing, I do it on my terms. I don't have people bombarding me with shit that's happening that he's gonna do to make me pissed off. So my heart rate stays normal most of the time because I'm not getting pissed off about some shit that I can't do anything about right now in this moment because this dumbass decided he's gonna sign an executive order impinging on somebody's rights somewhere. Because that shit happens so frequently that if you don't check it, you end up having a fucking stroke reading the goddamn news.
It happens so frequently and with such a wide variety of subjects that are areas of effect that we don't even get to see all of it.
Nope.
It's there. I'm pretty sure that at the end of all of this, whenever it's revealed how many executive orders were signed, like it's going to be one of those holy shit moments.
There's going to be a lot of really terrible surprises. And one of the things that bothers us goblins is everybody's like, let's get back to normal. Isn't the status quo normal? What got you into this?
Yep.
The same, you never, I don't know where I heard this human say it, but a human I'd overheard say you never put your foot in the same river twice.
I think
like,
that's
why can't you
I think
bloody
that's like
understand that?
Lao Tzu, but I think he was actually saying that the river's changed, and so have you.
Aye. Well, we heard it through goblin.
Well, you can never put your foot in the same spot in a river because the water is going to keep moving, and that's like I think the gist of that is you can try to put your foot in the same spot, but the water's moved. It's not the same spot.
At least that's the way us goblins understood the phrase.
The fastest path through the universe is with the current, because the leaf can't do shit against the current of the universe.
And speaking of my notes, we were talking about, I don't know what brought it up, and maybe you'll help me to remember why I wrote it down. I think you were talking about monks and monasteries. And I thought of, I remember now. You were talking about studying the esoteric and theology and being detached from the world, but not really part of it anymore, right? Us goblins have always loved the model of the Japanese that in Zen monasteries, because the idea that you join the monastery towards the end of your life, you don't detach from it when you're young. You learn the world, then you separate from it, which the Western model of sort of monasticism is you barely even grow up and then you join a convent or you join the monastery. It's a very backwards way of thinking.
Well, that's just like the Rumspringa that the Amish go through, where they are forced to go into the real world for a year and go enjoy and explore and see the offers or the things that are offered carnally and explore the world, and then they can decide if they want to go back to their village and be closed off from the rest of society. So I do think that there are, as you're pointing out, there are examples where these philosophies will say, yeah, we want you to be pious, but we also want you to understand that you have to experience life to understand the true breadth of what is piety. Piety does not just include only reveling in these things that we believe they're good. You must go and encounter sin. You must go and encounter what we believe to be bad to understand the true breadth of what this life is. Otherwise, you don't understand it all. And I think that's like, there is an element of balance that is put forth in other religious contexts that we don't get in Western philosophies necessarily that are mainstream. Like the, Amish philosophy is obviously Western, but it's definitely not mainstream.
It's very true. I'd heard of this ritual, but I'd actually never heard its name spoken, and I thank you for that. I've never watched
Rumspringa.
It sounds much more sinister than it is.
Well, and apparently, I guess 80% of the Amish go back after Rumspringa, so it's not like, this. I'm not sure how many people think of Amish people, but this is one of those things where you're like, oh, it's not as cultish as I thought. Like, there's elements of it where the way we've been presented it in film. I think Kingpin is supposed to be a Rumspringa, that movie Kingpin, but it's
Oh, yeah,
obviously an exaggeration.
There's I think it's called Road Trip, or no, it's called Sex Drive. There's a teenage movie called Sex Drive about two guys who are trying to go someplace because one of them wants to get laid, and there are fast cars involved, and they end up at a Rumspringa, and it's basically like a rave in a barn.
Wow. I guess you do what you have to do out in the rural areas, right?
Well,
get a DJ.
When I was younger, I used to go driving around Indiana, and I remember one point I was up north of Indianapolis, and I was just driving around and came around this bend and almost hit a horse-drawn buggy, and it had a more badass subwoofer than my car. The guy had installed a generator to run off of the rear wheels or something, and I mean, it's the future. They're aware of technology. It's not like they
use it.
Yeah, they use technology.
They have restrictions on it based on what the head of their villages decide. So every village is different. One may allow cell phones, one may not. Mm-hmm. And then like a lot of them. Almost all of them have power tools because they're building a lot of these warehouses and infrastructure. Like a lot of the infrastructure in the Midwest is built by Amish, and you won't even realize it because they have some of the best foundations and frames. Their frames are fucking perfect.
Yeah, Amish built post-frame buildings in Indiana are like so common. Mm-hmm. And it's the coolest part is that like a small bus or a large van shows up and a crew of dudes hops out, and it's almost like a clown car, except these guys aren't clowns. These are like master post-frame building construction dudes, and they'll assemble the side of a building in no time, and then they'll get the other side, and then the front and the back, and then next thing you know, it's like, okay, lift, and then boom, the frame is standing, and they just put the roofing on it. It's incredible, trusses and roofing, but still, they do it so fast that it's like
it's almost inhuman.
Yeah.
It's got me to think about the statistics of the current pandemic among the Amish. I wonder what their numbers are, if they're very different.
Probably really low, I would assume, just because they don't interact unless they need to. The only time you see them is if they're at the farmer's market, if they're building something, or if they're out shopping. They don't just frivolously go out, and I think that's a good thing. When you have people just going out to be out, that's fine, but you're gonna get sick really easily. Mm-hmm. You're gonna encounter some shit that you don't need to.
Yep, exposure is cumulative in this case. Mm-hmm. The longer you're exposed, the higher the chance of catching something.
What is the consensus among the human scientists? I had read that of all the insanity about where it came from, that it was somebody had said it might have been a pangolin. Is that the correct word or pronunciation of that word, pangolin?
The pangolin is a kind of scaled mammal. It's a kind of like an aardvark or an anteater. The coronavirus that was identified in Wuhan was shared something like 86 to 92% genetic similarities to a pangolin coronavirus. But it also shared something like 92 to 96% genetic similarities with a bat coronavirus. Okay. And uniquely with the bat coronavirus and the pangolin coronavirus is that they were very similar to a previously discovered coronavirus, like probably, I don't know, some other coronavirus has a name and number. And they said that it looked like it contained, the protein spike was shaped very similarly to, HIV. The protein spike that HIV uses to break through and inject its code. And of course, this is all very spurious information. I can't trust the internet very much anymore because
I did see that the governor of New York said that I think it was 80 to 90% of the cases that they had were actually European of origin.
yes,
They were able to pinpoint that they were European.
Yeah, they've shown that a lot of the outbreak came from Europe and not from China. So that's kind of that conversation was to try to get people to stop calling it the Chinese or Wuhan virus originally, because they were showing like, hey, it didn't even come from here or come from there. When we're talking about,
it went the other way around. It went from China to Europe.
If they're the same, because the whole reason they can identify the European one is because it's a different strain.
Yep.
And that's kind of where there's a lot of assumptions being made that it all originated in one place when it could have happened in multiple places at once. When we're, as we're alluding to, there's thousands of varieties of corona in that when we're looking at the ones that are the most dangerous, there could be multiples that are dangerous at the same time.
There are thousands of types of practically every virus at this point. And for every virus, there's a phage that's waiting to find it and destroy it. Just whether or not they can come in contact with each other.
Well, and then it's the same thing where it's not officially COVID-19 until you've become symptomatic. So
yeah, it's like coronavirus disease number 19.
Well, I'm saying it's only classified as COVID-19 once you've become symptomatic.
Yeah.
So if somebody's asymptomatic, they're carrying coronavirus.
Well, they're carrying SARS-CoV-2 now.
And that's like the same thing between HIV and AIDS that people weren't getting then. It's like just because you got HIV doesn't mean you get full-blown AIDS.
And then once you have COVID-19 or diagnosed with COVID-19, then you go through the stages until they develop ARDS, the acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is like super SARS.
Yeah.
And the first time...
That's not promising.
No, the first time super SARS emerged, there was like all this concern that because when people were trying to ventilate, people who were suffering from this, they were like greater risk of contracting the disease contracting the virus because they're aspirating for somebody or they're pumping them full of air and it's aerosolizing whatever's in their lungs, and it's like, this is some nasty shit. I mean, it's really nasty. It's hard to describe, based on limited information, or to fully conceptualize based on limited information. But this thing is so much worse than SARS was or MERS.
And there's a reason why us goblins aren't going to test the theory of our famous immunity, because there have been some things that we can catch, and this one, it's a devious disease.
Yeah, they don't even really know it, like the way it kills people. So
that was when I was listening earlier. And I had read.
Like ARDS is a symptom of what's going on. The fluid in the lungs, all this stuff that's going on. These are symptoms. That's not actually like what's really happening. Yeah, that's the really fucked up part. It destroys the lungs. By the time people have difficulty breathing and go into the hospital, they've already experienced lung damage. By the time that they're ventilated, like they've already suffered some kind of vascular damage. Like there are people who are experiencing complications with their nervous system. Young people are having strokes. Like, this is so fucking nasty, and we're just barely seeing what's happening because our state-run media situation is so freaking opaque that. I mean, I get it. They don't trust people enough to be calm and measured about their responses because, everyone freaked out and went out and bought a bunch of toilet paper and cleared the shelves. But I think we're far enough into this that we need to know, like, the severity of what's happening.
It's very telling, too, that I saw imagery and videos of lines at gun shops, people buying firearms and ammunition.
Apparently, there's an ammunition shortage now.
Yes, there is, and I don't know if it's a delusion that Americans have that they can basically use their AR-15s to fight everything in sight, or if they're genuinely that frightened.
No, they're getting ready to shoot their neighbors.
Yeah, I think it's what Tien's talking about. I think Americans just want an excuse to go on a shooting rampage. That's all it is, because when you look at the quote unquote prepping culture, a lot of it has to do with the notion of this straw man attacker that's coming in and trying to steal their shit. And then it's like on the other end is the zombie attack. So, or the outbreak. So there's really this it's a fantasy that Americans really want to shoot some shit. They really want to shoot some shit.
Seriously, throughout all of the plagues that humanity has survived. I mean all of them. At no point did civilized society break down to the point that people are running around zombie apocalypse style and swinging swords at each other. There was still a society that was in place. There were still there were still markets. There were
Look at the LA riots. That's the most recent example. And even then, they were going in people's homes. They were going after businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's quite amazing to me, this American-born westward expansion, manifest destiny, rugged individualism as the westward push. And everybody thinks they can do this entirely on their own. But if they really look at the history, both solid and anecdotal stories of the push, it was communities. It was clans and tribes. You know, if you go from the indigenous.
No single wagon made it from St. Louis or from Kansas City or wherever they started on the Oregon Trail. No single wagon made it alone. They made it in giant wagon trains. Like large, like entire communities, you're saying, would load up into those Conestogas, and they would drag their asses a few miles a day because those fucking ox are only so strong, and they don't want to kill them yet. They need those working animals. But like, it took entire organized groups of people to make it from
this bloody American myth of the individual conquering everything. It doesn't bloody work that way.
You can't circle one wagon. It's called circling the wagons for a reason.
Yeah. There's only one Daniel Boone. There's only one Davy Crockett. And even those guys needed entire groups of people to be able to function like that.
Well, even I had made the joke on Twitter that the idea that libertarianism works if you're a white male in the 1800s. But it didn't even work then, really.
No, because you get shot by somebody for being a jerk.
Yeah. Yep.
The Wild West wasn't that long ago. It ended really quickly because people didn't like getting shot. Seriously.
Yeah, Wild West is a terrible time in American history.
But yet the American humans romanticize that idea. And I think that it permeates into American culture still to this day.
Well,
because the white man with the gun ruled.
That's got it sorted then.
Hey, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with you in a little bit. This is House Panther by Disco Bay.
This is what makes me house music.
And we're back. And that was my good friend Kenny Mahuse, who's now going by Disco Bay. So, I don't know if anyone else has been following Ghost in the Shell, but we have a new, feels like a half season, but they're calling it a season on Netflix. And it looks incredible. It has some of the best animated fight choreography visualization that I think I've ever seen.
I was really impressed with it, and as you're saying, it does feel like it's incomplete, but I think there's something to that. When I first started watching the series, it felt kind of dumbed down at first, and I was wondering if that was my imagination, so I went and looked. So a lot of the same writers and producers and directors from the original standalone Complex series and the series before that are actually involved. So it's not like they brought in a bunch of new people and then the new people were like, I'm going to redo Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah. It wasn't like that live action movie we got.
No, not at all. But what it felt like at first was that the metaphors and all of the abstract concepts that made Ghost in the Shell so science fiction esque seemed to take a back seat to the exploration of the emotional drives and the notion of justice itself. And that's where I think what we're seeing is the writers exploring the concept of justice through these characters rather than having the story be about any specific threat. And I think that's why it feels a little disconnected at first, but as I got through the series, the more they explored different threats and the moral ambiguity of what they were calling threats, I felt even more as if what appeared at first to be straightforward was definitely not straightforward. And there's this element of like, oh, my allegiances were misplaced and I'm looking at the wrong person as the protagonist, and maybe I need to reassess who I'm seeing as the good guy and who's the bad guy. Because by the end, you're very much questioning, like, whose side should I be on?
Well, I think there's always been some tension between the operators of Section 9 and the government of Japan, at least within that story universe.
Right.
There's
right.
always some kind of complication about, sordid pasts and debts, and it's a really complex story world. And so maybe I wanted them to explain more of that. But what I realized the second time through was that I was actually realizing my own understanding of that story universe, and they had done such a good job in describing it in the previous versions of the show that they didn't have to explain any of those things to me. And I was seeing a version of this show that, like, I'm finally ready to watch it kind of situation.
Yeah,
because
I feel the same. Yeah.
because now now I don't have to think about the intricacies of that level of communication.
We don't, when they say turn off your cyber brain, we don't have to be explained what that means.
Yeah.
There's little shit where they can just go straight to it and they don't have to give all the backstory.
We know what autistic mode is. They don't
Right.
have to say it anymore. It's like they can just act on it, and we know that they're going to do these things. And what I found, so I think the best part was that distraction in the beginning with the jocks, because we've been trained for so long. It's like you're saying, like, who actually are the good guys? We've been trained for so long to root for Section 9 that when you find out who the Prime Minister is, it's like, wait a second. These motherfuckers.
Yep. Because then, like you're saying, those jocks, the first bad guys, quote unquote, were presented, when they start explaining, like, why they're fighting back, you're like, wait a minute. So why is Section 9 going after them again?
Yeah. It's like, I thought that.
And even they start to question it.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they're like, you know, in the process, them questioning, they'll even be like, oh, this, if it wasn't illegal, I'd actually really admire this person's work.
I mean, Bato in the bank with the old people.
Right, yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Like,
that's
that's as close as I can get to a Darmak and Gelada Tanagra type description of that episode without saying anything else. But yeah, Bato in the bank with the old people. Like, right there, that was the Bato that I that we know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so they nail his character, and they give us a glimpse at him serving up his own kind of justice.
Yep.
And I guess what I mean when I say I feel like we got like half a season is that they only did it once. But maybe that's the way that they've got to tell these stories now.
Yeah. Well, because even then, there's no big bad yet.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it is clearly. They already made the second season, and when they released it, there's no question of if the second season's coming. So there's, it's not even really a cliffhanger.
No, it's just more like an intermission.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I feel like that is. It feels as if we're now just watching them, and it doesn't feel like we're watching a story. We're just thrust into their lives now.
Yeah.
And there's no beginning or end of the story. We're just watching their lives. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely feels different than the previous iterations, and that's kind of where I think, like,
when you say it like that, it makes me realize that when I want a Ghost in the Shell story, I end up watching the movie. Or when they take the first or second standalone complex and reduce it to the primary story arc of the Laughing Man or the individual 11.
Yep.
Those are the versions of the story that I like the most because, I mean, aside from being like 3 hours long or something for the standalone complex movies, they reveal why it takes them 20 episodes to weave that narrative. Because when you remove all of the extra stuff, sure, it's more concise. It kind of makes a little bit more sense because it's presented in this more linear fashion. But it removes the character development and focuses on like this overarching bad guy villain storyline, government plot, whatever it is. And you can't have that kind of pacing in a series.
No, you really can't.
A series is good for development, it's good for exploring the world, it's good for all those things, but really when I want a good story, it's a movie. It's longer than 3 episodes. It might even be 4 or 5 or 6 episodes in length. And it focuses on, a very limited perspective. It never gets as grand or meta as the series. And so it's weird. I felt like I was getting a kind of it was a short movie or an unresolved movie, but had too much extra stuff. I don't know. It looks beautiful. I mean,
Well, but even then, so I don't think this is a spoiler, just because when they start alluding to Western culture, so there's like clearly a Matrix allusion. There's clearly an allusion to Karate Kid. There's an allusion to Bruce Lee, and then there's an allusion to 1984. And there's probably more. And, you call that Blade Runner. There's all these things that they're referencing in the series that, in context, make me think that they know what they're doing in a way that gives me the sense to give them the benefit of the doubt with the larger arc and the larger narrative. Because that's where I'm like, where it ends up, if it were any other series, I'd be like, this fucking sucks. But where they're at, I'm like, okay, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, I feel like this is part 1 of 3. I expect 30 episodes.
At least part 1 of 3, if not part 1 of 7, where, season 2 may just be the
another
tip of
10
the
episodes.
Right. Well, I think it's only 12.
Another 12 episodes. Well, yeah. Even then, like, if they're working with some kind of model where they can have regular releases and they want to develop a larger world with more complex villains, I think that'd be kind of cool, actually. Yeah. I think that at this point they've described a version of dystopian Japan that, I mean, it's tech rich and there's some wealthy people, but there's also some really poor people still. There's still some, obviously there are people who are still recovering for the uprising in Dejima or something like that from the second season. But it's not pretty. It's like Blade Runner, but mostly in the daytime. And
then there's the post-human element too, which
it's
kind of lost. It's not really lost, but that's where they're starting to weave that in, which is where I think that the series is going, in the sense of if you have post-humans, then Major and Bato and Sato are gonna have to, like, they're gonna have to come up with different strategies.
Yeah.
Like, Togusa is another example of, like, all of the things that we've been shown previously. Now Section 9 is kind of, they're not second tier, but there's things out there that are definitely better qualitatively.
Yeah. The Major might still have, like, one of the most advanced military grade cyborg body for that loadout, but there are equally as sophisticated, if not more sophisticated, cyborgs that contain like electronic attacks that are high energy, that go beyond just like simple software hacks that they rely on, like physical electronic attacks.
Or like they had that boxer who had the cybernetic hand, and he was like, that's just an example of, like, they're alluding to these things where this person was he was an elite human in the first place, and then he got enhanced to become post-human, and how Section 9 has to deal with that shit. And that's kind of like when they're bringing in post-humans as an existential threat, but also showing that post-humans are just upgraded humans that may have valid problems with society, then that's where the real complexity in the story comes, is like, then you have to look at the post-humans and say, in some cases they're just trying to survive, and in other cases they're actually carrying out what the audience would probably see as justice.
Yeah. No, that was actually like the mind-bendy story type of story that I like. That was the essence of Ghost in the Shell to me, and they nailed that part.
Yeah.
It just seemed like they there's a lot that's condensed, and I feel like what we saw of the post-human section of this season was, it's the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more that they have potential to do with this story, and I'm actually really excited about it. Just mostly because it looks so good. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're clearly working with some brand new computers for their rendering process. They've got a new engine or something.
Yeah, it's like a mix of cell shading and 3D.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely moments where you see that they're using 3D models because the camera will rotate around the model. But there's obviously the cell shading aspect to it too, which is where they must be using some new.
The part that I found really amazing was buildings in the background and skylines and the sky and just things off in the distance. Objects
the shadows and reflections were just top notch.
Anything off in the distance. There are some scenes where it almost looks real. Mm-hmm. Like, are my eyes fooling me? Is that? No, surely that's an animation, right? That's a rendering.
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely some spots where it looks, it crosses the uncanny valley for landscapes. Not so much. There's parts where you suspend disbelief and believe that these humans or cyborgs are physically real in their space, but it's still not our world. But there's a lot of motion in the wrists and the hands and the like metacarpals that they get really well, so that a lot of other animations don't get right. Because when a character's holding a gun, the bottom, like the pinky and the ring finger, end up doing some weird shit in a lot of cases, but they get around it because there's multiple points of articulation in a wrist, and when you grip with your bottom fingers, something changes in your bottom wrist, part of your wrist, that a lot of animations don't get that they got correct.
Yeah.
And that's little shit like that.
Well, I think Ghost in the Shell has a really good history of doing really subtle things. Like even in the first movie, when the agents come in to examine what's left of the cybernetic body that had the program in it. And the analyst sits down at the computer and his hands break out and turn into each finger has 6 to 8 different mini pads to actuate keys individually. And granted, that's a movie level animation, and there has to be more of that kind of stuff in it. Mm-hmm. But even that movie is decades old at this point. So they've got they set a very high bench for themselves early on, but they've also managed to maintain such a high level of sophistication within their story universe. I just want more, basically. That's my only complaint, is we only got 12 episodes.
Yeah.
I feel like it's really, guys, that's half of a hamburger.
Well, and I wonder if they were originally going to do it as one, but because of
global pandemic.
Yeah. Well, because even then, when you watch it, they give a warning talking about that they're trying to look out for the well-being of the voice actors. So I don't.
I think that's for the English version.
Right, but I'm saying I don't think they're recording it yet because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So they're holding off recording to not put people at risk. But that probably pushes production back on season 2. And potentially season 3 and 4, because they can't even record the voiceovers yet for season 1.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with all of these increased streaming activity and conferencing software utilization, and Facebook created their own version of Zoom to handle larger groups. I've noticed that there's I've been getting an uptick in sponsored ads. So there are companies out there that basically are A&R for voiceover artists. Mm-hmm. And apparently there's been increased activity in the requests for voiceover artists, for people who have their own set up so that they can just say their lines, and if they get selected, they make $100 a day or something or more, depending on the level they can get into. And of course, all these are like clubs, so you got to pay money to get access to the list, and you might not get selected, and all that kind of stuff. It's the nature of the internet, though, isn't it?
Pay to play, man.
You pay to play, or you build your own platform, and you hope that the right people find out about it.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's whether it's radio, podcasting,
DJ mixes.
Yeah, all that shit. There's a lot of pay to play element that once somebody establishes their brand and the public starts trusting that brand, then they start selling that brand or access to that brand, and that's where pay to play comes from.
Yep.
Unfortunately. So, there's this whole circular cycle of somebody who starts off trying to be independent, and then they get a big platform, and then they charge other people pay to play. Same shit with like Alex Jones. You can pay to get on his platform, but he was originally trying to put out his platform because he couldn't get on anybody else's. And now he's the big main conspiracy theorist voice, but you can just pay to get on there. And it's hard to tell if people really understand how much of their media that they access is paid placement, and very little of it's organically falling in front of their eyes. Whether it's on Google search or on your Twitter feed or on your Facebook feed, paid placement is just so prevalent. It's hard to know.
Yeah, like when saying it's leaked.
Yeah, if something's leaked, I see all these videos on YouTube of leaked stuff from Disney, and these people habitually get leaked, quote unquote, stuff from Disney, and I'm like, okay, clearly Disney's planting the stuff and putting this information out there to these specific sources, but then they're presenting it as if they got the down low or snuck into somebody's email and got this information, as if Disney's not putting it out there.
Yeah. I think that was the whole thing about 90s rappers, right? Or early 2000s rappers, is that when it was leaked, it wasn't that it was leaked, it's that they needed to keep their audience paying attention. Mm-hmm. Because attention spans were super short, because we had just gained access to the entire repository of all music. And people were sharing it with Napster and Kazaa and any of those pre-torrenting platforms.
Yep.
And even those ended up becoming pay-to-play, which is really amusing.
Well, okay. Do you remember when the Wolverine got leaked?
Yeah.
So that
and it wasn't complete. It still had like unrendered.
Exactly. So to me, that is an example of an actual leak, because not only did the film get leaked before it hit theaters, it was incomplete.
Yeah, it was missing sound. It was missing renderings.
CGI. There was parts where you could see the
wires.
The wiring. Yeah, and it like that is the closest I've seen to an actual leak, compared to that. The interview, I feel like, was a plant. And again, there's a huge difference in leaks versus plants. Just the timing and the logic and the explanations that were associated with the interview. They were trying to blame it on North Korea, which felt like they were just trying to hype up the movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of where that film flopped. It's gonna flop regardless, but it felt like their leak was meant to try to make it.
And then our intelligence agencies said, yes, Sony was hacked by North Korea.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, sure they were.
Yeah, the country they were telling us just months before only had 23 websites.
Yeah.
That's the narrative that was coming out of our government, is that the North Koreans were so information restricted that they only had 23 websites in their site. Then those people came and hacked Sony.
Well, they've got North Korean Linux, and nobody can understand what they're actually doing. So
Yeah.
it's written in some weird version of K++ or K sharp sharp or something. When nobody knows how to compile that shit. I feel like Iran and Pakistan probably have their own, like Pakistan has P++ and Iran has I sharp or something like that, and they have entire libraries written in languages. It's like just as obscure as Xcode is to somebody who's never looked at Xcode. They look at him like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah, I mean,
It's not like the West or Japan has the lock on computer science.
well, that's just like assuming everybody who codes should have to know English.
Yeah.
That's kind of a weird assumption, right?
Yeah, no. It's like, I think that's the point, is that this idea that the only Linux worth knowing how to use is one that was coded somewhere in America or in Europe where they code in English. I bet India has a really interesting computer science language of their own that we don't know about. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't, basically, or if they did.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it wouldn't be surprising, because then, yeah, like, I mean, but then again, a lot of Indians know English,
It's true.
so that might not be as much of a necessity there.
You know, the other day you said something about AI, and it occurred to me, like, how all of our healthcare systems are networked.
No, they're not.
They're not. They're on segregated networks, right?
Yeah.
There's no way for is there a way for an AI to get into one of those?
Potentially, but what ends up happening is a lot of medical databases are proprietary, so they're actively closed networks, and because every office, well, okay, this is where it gets complicated. So
let's say that
you have to have an open data layer now because of Obama and the affordable, like, ACA.
So let's say that some AI does some kind of like power line brute force into a healthcare facility, and then does the fan hack, the fan data access hack thing to get data out of systems, to get into and out of computers. Is there a way, if we had some kind of if we were dealing with a malicious AI? I'm going way out on a limb here because I've been watching some, Ghost in the Shell, and I'm thinking about like crazy utilizations of technology, because you pointed out the other day, and I saw this too, and I thought, oh, this is amazing that their data is being extracted through modulating fan speeds. This is some like next level.
One of the issues is libraries that are associated. So if I extract data and I don't have the proper library to read it, that data is useless.
But maybe
and that's ultimately what it comes down to, is just because an AI can extract data doesn't mean it speaks that language.
But how do we know that it can't learn how to speak that language, though?
That's not to say it can't, but if it's a proprietary language, it would have to have some sort of Rosetta Stone. So just because it has access to a language doesn't mean it has the capacity to learn it accurately. Like, unless you have a key, or you have the capacity to reverse engineer a cipher, which is possible, then you can't necessarily crack a code. So that's where, just because a computer could access data does not mean it has the cipher to crack the code.
But what if it already knows how to read that library?
I mean, that's like,
What if this thing isn't just like a, I don't know. Is there even a way for a cyber attack to alter the way our healthcare machines read patient data?
Yes. Oh, most definitely.
And so this is some super wingnut conspiracy shit.
I mean, it's not. The issue is we can already hack into.
No, I mean, like, no, that there would be some kind of organization or entity that would leverage healthcare monitoring machines to give bad data to influence healthcare providers to giving the wrong treatment.
I'm saying that's already a thing. That's not even.
So that's a thing. So
hypothetical. That's already a thing.
Okay. So.
And the issue is, what you're talking about. The main reason it becomes a problem is because corporate espionage becomes an influential factor. So then when you have people like Elizabeth Holmes in the Theranos case, they effectively committed fraud on themselves. But the issue would be if you wanted to sabotage somebody's company, then you would go in and ruin their testing, like the ranges on which their machines are reading. So if somebody's doing a blood glucose curve, you go in and screw up their machine, so then your company would be the one that would get the contract and not the one that has the screwed up machines. So there's definitely incentive for people to go in and mess with medical equipment and its ability to function. And there's already documented cases of these things happening, so it's not even in a hypothetical anymore.
Yeah. Well then, let's just hope that our cybersecurity task force has managed to figure out how to prevent that kind of stuff from happening.
They haven't. And
fingers crossed.
because the issue is, again, we're talking about the people who were trying to dictate the rules to secure health data didn't understand cybersecurity in the first place. So the things that they did to try to make data more accessible inherently created more cybersecurity problems. So there's benefits and trade-offs, and the problem becomes when you have these trade-offs and benefits being decided by non-security professionals, then they created a whole bunch of problems that wouldn't have been there if security professionals had been consulted.
I feel like that's kind of the problem with allowing economists to dictate healthcare policy.
Exactly. Exactly right. And this, what you're nailing on is one of the big problems is in this country, if you have money, people will listen to you because they assume you're smart and assume you know more than they should assume you should, or than they should assume you do. Elon Musk should be compartmentalized to discussing rocket marketing, production, but not rocket mechanics.
Yeah.
He's not a rocket scientist. He should not be the person people are discussing. He's smart, he knows physics, but he's not a rocket scientist. He should not be discussing the complexities of LiDAR or machine learning reading what is in front of a car. He should be discussing how the car works, but not trying to explain those things to the public because he's not a LiDAR expert. He's not an expert in machine learning. But people will give him the benefit of the doubt and listen to him on these things and way more because he's rich.
You know, it's funny. Jeff Bezos also has a space rocket company, and I don't see anybody asking him about rocket propulsion or rocket technology.
As they shouldn't.
Yeah. I wonder what's the difference there.
Elon leans into it. That's the big difference, is that he as much as he's an intelligent human being, he has this essence of being aloof because he has no social intelligence. So he does not realize, or maybe he does, but by leaning into the glorification of his intelligence, he's making everybody stupider, or he's making everybody dumber. And he either doesn't care or doesn't understand that by going and starring, or he doesn't star, as being a guest in Iron Man 2 and making it seem as if he's a real life Tony Stark, he makes people dumber by making them think it's him writing all the equations and not a team of people working at Tesla or SpaceX. Like, nobody conceptualizes their teams because he leans into it and allows people to romanticize him as the
Tony Stark
lead.
is like 20 dudes in a room.
And that's what we saw with Spider-Man Far From Home.
Yeah.
Was those people got pissed off because Tony took all the credit, and then as soon as you realize those people together are smarter than Tony Stark, and to a certain degree, that's when you see the Elon Musk lie. And that's why you can't hate on the Mysterio people, because they were wrong too.
Yep.
That's why the shit is so, the more complex a villain, the more justified the Killmongers, the Mysterios, the Vultures, they're way more interesting.
Oh, yeah. So, hey, that's all we got for the day. Thanks for listening.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Exceptional Radio.